Good evening, everyone. This is MSY's Research Notes. Yesterday, I have introduced several other parts of the literature review, and today I'll move to the next parts. I think I'll just omit the teacher's paragraph because I don't quite understand the logic about that paragraph, and I think it's very, very confusing. So I just firstly omit that part and move to the next part, which has a relatively clearer logic. So it's paragraph 12. So this paragraph follows a clear logic. A positive atmosphere is impossible if the matters of the classes are perceived unappealing, irrelevant, and unengaging. This is just like a kind of statement, or this is just like a claim. And then the author moves to a proof, which is used to prove the claim, and also quoted Professor DeWall's previous research. So DeWall has argued that routine, boredom, and lack of engagement are fatal in foreign language classes. This is a kind of proof. However, then the author further introduced the teacher's difficulties. So actually this part explains that routine or boredom is not merely the teacher's faults, because teachers are also constrained by various factors. For example, teachers are not necessarily to blame because they are required to follow strict guidelines. And in my own research, I also introduced that teachers are constrained by, for example, the contextual factors such as the schools or the colleague cooperation or the administrative support. And also they are constrained for for example, their identity, which makes the English classroom a kind of hierarchical society or a kind of community. So that's how I introduce near-peer instruction, and that is the focus of my own research. And so after introducing teachers' difficulties, then the authors further introduced what teachers need to do, and also quoted Professor DeWall's research. And then we move to the next paragraph, paragraph 13. Well, this is the conclusion of the literature review. Well, in the beginning, the authors used one sentence to conclude all the review part and hinted the theoretical foundation for their study. Quote, students constantly experience both negative and positive emotions in foreign language classes, and these are caused by a range of learner internal and external variables. So this is just like one sentence that conclude the literature review, and then they move to the next part, and then they focused on different variables, which can be regarded as the subset of the first sentence, which is about the next layer. So, quote, some of the independent variables interact and some may weigh more heavily on levels of FLE and FLCA on students. So you can see that in this sentence, they further focus on the variables, which is also the main part of their essay. Then DeWall's previous study on which the present study is based. Okay, so the bell rang and I have to pause. Now I resume. Then the author introduced DeWall's study on which the present study is based, and said that Professor DeWall's previous study divided the students into different age groups, and the present study used a kind of pseudo-longitudinal design to examine how different constructs, namely FLE and FLCA, evolved among different age groups, and the influence of various variables on those two dependent variables. So this is the conclusion of the literature review. And paragraph 14 is the last part of the literature review, and the authors pointed out the research gaps explicitly. Quote, what remains to be investigated is to what extent the relationship between FLE and FLCA remains constant over time. Whether mean levels of FLE and FLCA change, and whether the weight of learner internal variables and learner external variables in predicting FLCA and FLE shifts over time. So you can see this is just like a version of the research questions. You can see they mentioned the relationship between those two constructs, and whether those two constructs change the mean levels, whether those mean levels change. And third is whether the variables, the effect or the weight of the variables change over time. So you can see this is just like three research questions. And this is like the concluding part of the literature review based on the research gaps and theoretical foundations. Finally, authors, they pointed out directly the questions that they want to answer. So this is the last part of the literature review. So my comments on this overall literature review is that, firstly, I think the authors have demonstrated elaborate writing techniques, and while I am reading, I certainly understand the logic flow of most of the part of the literature review. Moreover, they have shown a solid theoretical foundation, and I have learned many preeminent scholars and their core academic contributions from this work. And for other advantages, I think I've already talked too much in my previous videos. So here I mainly want to focus on something that I haven't, I think, fully grasped, or something that I still feel very confusing. Firstly, even though the overall logic is clear, sometimes I cannot grasp the purpose of certain paragraphs. Or I might think that if the authors could add some subtitles to clarify the structure of our literature review, might be even better. Or in other words, sometimes I may feel that I can't fully understand the relationships between, the literature review part and the research questions that they really want to ask and answer. So you might feel that literature review is a separate part of your essay, and I can only know the research gaps at the very end, but I think it might be much better if you point out some of the gaps, not that explicitly in some part of your literature review. And I think that would be much, much better, because if you only leave the gaps or, the gaps or how you want to fill those gaps at the very end without any hints in this overall process, then I might feel that for novice readers like me, I feel you're not, constructing a close relationship with your present study. You're just, making a conclusion or making a comprehensive summary of the existing studies. You're not, linking those things to your essay, to your studies. So I think this is probably one of the major problems that I might discover in this literature review. So in my own literature review, I have absolutely several parts. Although they belong to probably the same subtitle, but you absolutely have different paragraphs, and for most of the time, each paragraph represents like a new part in that chapter or in that subtitle. So you can see in my literature review, especially at the very end of each part, or the end under each subtitle, I would hint or make some suggestions about the research gaps. For example, when I introduced the variables which can make an impact on FLE, I absolutely told something about the teachers and absolutely the atmosphere. However, at the very end of this part, I just like the authors did in this essay, I also said some constraints that the teachers are facing right now, and they are facing multidimensional constraints. However, then I said for example, to address these problems or for this kind of reason, for the teacher's constraints, for this kind of reason, near-peer teacher has been proposed as a way to increase student-teacher closeness and to improve their relationships. So I think this is a kind of way to suggest that your essay is related to near-peer teachers instead of those in-service teachers. So I think this, even though you said this implicitly, you are just, even though you said this implicitly, you also had already linked this literature review with your own studies. So I think this is a better technique. I think the authors in this essay might need to use probably in their other essays. So I think this is just my personal suggestions. Here are the research questions. First is, does the relationship between FLE and FLCA change over time in secondary school? This is the first one. And the second one is, do levels of FLE and FLCA change over time in secondary school? And the third is, are levels of FLE and FLCA predicted by the same independent variables at different points in time in secondary school? And fourth is, does the effect of gender on FLE and FLCA change over time in secondary school? So I think those research questions, you can see that I've mentioned most of them in the previous literature review part, like the relationship, like different variables. However, you can also see that gender as a kind of demographic variables, I think the author didn't pay too much attention, or at least the author, I don't think they introduced this part. So probably this also shows that, to some extent, the literature review is not directly linked to their present study. So when I am reading the literature review, I really didn't notice the part about the gender. So this might be a question for me, because I don't quite understand why the authors put gender here. Well, I think one explanation is that gender as a demographic variable, I think the existing studies didn't or haven't reached like consistent academic findings. So probably I think that is why the authors they want to further discuss the role of gender here. Due to inconsistent findings, and that's why they didn't discuss like other demographic variables such as age or age, their relative standing in their foreign language groups. But however, I think in the following paragraphs, you will know that they indeed discussed their, for example, their English scores, their relative standing in the English class. And also other kind of demographic variables or individual difference variables. So you can see that merely choosing gender as a kind of question, this might be a little bit weird. And I think the authors, they didn't really lay a foundation here in the literature review part. So that might be a little bit confusing for me. And next, we move to the methodology part. And in the methodology part, we can see that there are mainly 3 different chapters or 3 different sections. The first is foreign languages in the UK secondary schools. And second is about participants. And third is the instrument. Well, I think this is the most basic structure of the methodology part. I do think that in my own essay or other essays written by other scholars, we need to include more things. Well, probably because this data set is from the previous study, which has already been published, so the authors, they didn't, put too many things here in the methodology part, because the methodology is basically the same. So this is probably one reason. However, I mean, if this is just the first publication of the data set, then I absolutely think that the authors need to include more sections here to help the reader have a better understanding and clearer knowledge about their experiment. So for the methodology part, probably today I will just end the first section, which is foreign languages in the UK secondary schools. So this part mainly includes the situations or basic information about the UK secondary schools. I mean, basic information, for example, how students are supposed to be admitted by universities or high schools, so what kind of exams they need to take and at what kind of age. I think this is necessary, but I don't quite agree that the authors put this as a single or independent section, because I think this section can absolutely be embedded into probably the participants part, because this is just like the experiment context or some detailed information about the participants. So I don't quite understand why the author, just put this independent section here. I think it might be a little bit conspicuous, too conspicuous. So I think this part is unnecessary in my own essay, as I hardly have seen other researchers explain the context of their experiment in such detail. We generally, I mean, especially for my quasi-experimental design, we generally, absolutely we need to introduce the context of our experiment, but we normally put that at the very beginning of the participants part, or we can just introduce this. Normally we put this at the very beginning before we introduce, for example, the age or demographic variables or other information which is necessary about our participants. So this is what we normally do. So actually, when you are reading this part in this essay, you might feel a bit confusing at the very beginning because you don't quite understand why the authors they introduced this part here. I think I have already told you my personal explanation, because some people, they are unfamiliar with the UK's situation, and probably introducing this can help the authors further or better explain their further findings. And I think, even though to some extent the authors need to include this kind of information, I still don't think it's necessary to put it here as a kind of individual or independent section. So Well, this is the foreign language in the UK secondary schools. This is the first section of the methodology. And tomorrow I'll move to the next part, participants, and the third part, the instruments. And for the results and the discussion part, I want to focus more on the discussion part, because this part I can tell you that I've learned a lot of writing techniques. But the results part, I think I shall just omit most of them. And it's just about, presenting data and also the tables and one chart. I think it's not very necessary for us to introduce here. So this is basically my plan for my following videos in the following days. And it's late at night, and I have to go. Have to go now, and I need to go back to my dormitory and take a bath, take a shower. So, and have a good night. Well, this is basically today. This is what we have today, and this is MSY's research note. And I'm very glad that I have already finished the literature review part here today, and I think I have made a progress. I have made much progress, and I think I will. I really hope to see you tomorrow. And this is the end of today. And this is MSY's research note. And see you tomorrow. Good night.